Thank you all for being here and welcome to our conversation on how should companies react to activism. I am Sarah Rapucci. I lead the Policy and Insights team for the Americas for Economist Impact. Shareholder, employee, and consumer activism have become concerns of all businesses today, and I think we've all seen the impact that has had. Research has shown that nearly 60% of consumers will pay more for products that are made by purpose-driven companies. And shareholders are driving their cash towards green investments and steering companies toward a more sustainable future. Meanwhile, many companies, of course, have seen sharp increases in employee activism with this new generation of workers. In response to that, B corporations have been meeting verified standards of social and environmental performance, public transparency, and legal accountability in order to balance profit with purpose. And that is the backdrop for our discussion today. To bring insights to this conversation, I'm joined by an amazing panel of practitioners. Shar Love is Global Director of Advocacy at Natura & Company. Wojtek Baczynski is co-founder of Interdependence Coalition. Gabby Salzberger is chair of Global ESG Advisory Teneo. And Mona Das is a state senator in Washington State. Thank you all so much for being here. Today, we will be focusing our discussion on concrete ways that companies can constructively engage for positive change. So I will start with Wojtek. There's clearly money to be made from a veneer of effort in sustainability, basically greenwashing. You are a board director at B Lab Global, which oversees the development of the B Corp movement. Can you give us some examples of how the B Corp community engages with stakeholders and takes the activist stance?
Sure. Thank you, first of all, for having me here. It's really good to be here with all the speakers. It's a pleasure for me, and I'm really grateful for this platform and a chance to talk about B Corps and the examples. So first, I will just show you this little thing. That's the B sign, if you don't know it yet. B Corps are generally companies that have met high standards of social and environmental impact and performance, and which voluntarily embed stakeholder governance into their articles of associations and statutes. So they consider stakeholder interests at par with profits. There's many good examples of B Corps engaging with activists or becoming activists. Char is a perfect example in Char's company. She will be probably speaking about that a little bit more. But I just wanted to highlight some of the collaborations that are going on within the B Corp movement, and that will shed some light on the general trend. So, for instance, B Corps are strongly collaborating together in the activist sphere. So, for instance, you have a Ben & Jerry's partnering with Tony's Chocolonely, but by committing to the Tony's Open Chain program and the ambition to basically end slavery in the chocolate supply chain. That's one of the collaborations. Another one from the European B Corp network is the B Corp Beauty Coalition. 7 companies, major companies from the beauty sector, teaming up to create more impact and to basically be an activist in that space. We have working groups, very interesting. In the Benelux, a group of B Corps, they basically came together to form an anti-racist pro-inclusion initiative, and they're providing Jedi practices. They're providing lectures on this topic and trying to educate the other players and their competitors also in this space. We have a lot of advocacy that is going on in B Lab. So, for instance, the Interdependence Coalition that we came up in B Lab Europe, we're trying to advocate. We're advocating basically within the EU Commission, with the EU Commission and the Parliament, to embed stakeholder governance in the new CSDD directive that is coming out. We're fighting for Article 25, which will mandate directors of European companies to include stakeholder interests in their decision-making processes. Very important announcement also. Empresas con propósito. Sorry for my Spanish, it's not that good, but it's a benefit corporation legislation that has been passed through the efforts of the B-Lab Spanish team. Basically 30,000 individuals and businesses signed up for a petition, which the B-Lab Spanish team took to the parliament, and now we have a benefit corporation Spanish statute. Very interesting. But also we have many companies aside from Patagonia, which everybody knows. We have, for instance, WeTransfer dedicates 30% of our advertising spaces for the causes they care about. We have a very interesting German B Corp, Tomorrow Bank, which is reimagining traditional banking, mobile banking, basically using the money that you're depositing in the accounts to finance good causes. So you know that your money will not go to financing coal plants and other activities that maybe people should be rethinking whether they should be caring about them. So what I want to say is that, you know, the companies within the B Corp network, they are basically exemplifying and championing the idea that we need businesses across all sectors to think and to rethink and create change in their industries, so that they will also empower their consumers to play an active role in making a positive impact. So what I want to say is actually we're trying to promote activism through the use of the business models, through the use and rethinking of the business sector. I think that would be my go at this question, Sarah.
Great, thank you so much. I'll turn now to Shar. Shar, Natura & Company is the world's biggest B Corp, and you're also a former activist in residence. From your perspective, how do you think that activists should work with companies?
Well, thank you so much for the question, and it's so nice to have Wojtek speaking ahead about all the wonderful things that are happening in the B Corp movement. And you're right, Sarah. Actually, before I took on this role at Natura & Co. as the Global Director of Advocacy, I had this very cool role at B-Lab UK, which was as an activist in residence. And maybe I'll just reflect briefly on a couple of the learnings that came from a one-year project that we did at B-Lab UK with, again, this focus on really trying to understand what are activist businesses and what does that look like in practice? And what I'd love to do is sort of build that bridge to some of the things that we're exploring right now at Natura & Co., which is the world's largest B Corp. And for those of you who aren't maybe as familiar with Natura & Co. as a company, what you may be familiar are some of the brands that are within our sort of family. And those brands include The Body Shop, Avon, Aesop, and Natura, which is our Brazilian brand. So some of the things that came up in this initial study we did, which was, again, really trying to understand where and how businesses were exploring this frontier of working with and engaging in some of the principles of activism. One of the first things that became clear was really recognizing that some of these businesses were very focused on finding ways to support and engage their people to engage in activism. So this became like a really critical principle for businesses that wanted to explore the space. So, you know, we saw quite a few examples of businesses in the B Corp movement that were doing it. And what I'm excited about is seeing how that's showing up at Natura & Co. You know, we have The Body Shop, which is an organization which was originally founded by the amazing Dame Anita Roddick, where the spirit of activism is sort of in the walls. But our Natura, our Brazilian company, is also embracing many of these principles. And again, this idea of really helping support the people that work at the company to understand the power they have to be a force for good. So at Natura right now, there is a campaign that launched on World Amazon Day on September 5th. And what it was doing is really encouraging people at Natura to be really thinking about, you know, where and how they could join movements, how they could think about using their vote to protect the Amazon, and even how they were thinking about the choices of products they were using, like being quite conscious of their choices they were making. So again, this is like a really key thing, which is not as much externally focused, but sort of internally focused. Some of the other things we've seen businesses do, and that we have are leaning into a little bit in our work at Natura & Co, is really about really recognizing that this is a moment to take a stand. And I think that's a really critical element of what it means to engage with activists and to be an activist business. If there are things that are happening out there you don't agree with, like not saying anything is saying something in itself. So really having the courage, step out there and really make your views known. Body Shop did that earlier this year here in the UK by publicly opposing the police and crime bill that was happening here in the UK. So again, really taking a firm stand. The third element that we kind of picked up in this activist business project was really recognizing the power of businesses to use the things that they have, their assets, their spaces, their products, to engage in conversations. And Wojtek, you've sort of already mentioned this with some of the B Corps you shared. ESOP is, again, one of the companies that's in our sort of family here. And one of the things I love that they do is they have what they call the Queer Library, where in their stores, what they do is on a particular day in a particular region, they will take their products off the shelves and instead put on books written by LGBTQIA plus authors, and encouraging people to sort of experience and understand these, otherwise possibly not as high profile authors. And the great thing about it is ESOP then gives the books complimentarily away for people. So again, they're using their shelf spaces and their spaces to draw attention. So that's like a really interesting thing about using what you have, in terms of your space. I mean, Wojtek, you talked about joining forces with others, and I think that's a really important thing, which is we all know that not one organization or business can solve the challenges we're facing. We need a movement of movements, and I think that's where, again, finding ways to collaborate with people who have a similar view to you of some of the changes you want to see happen is a really critical thing. So we are at Natura & Co working in collaboration with others in the beauty industry on the Eco Beauty Score, which is, again, an example of joining forces to really drive sort of a view for a change in our particular industry in terms of giving greater visibility to clear and consistent and comparable science-based information around the environmental impact of our products. And then the last thing, and this is, again, where I think the systems conversation becomes really quite important, and some of the things, Wojtek, you were talking about in terms of changing the rules of the game, this is got to be about how do we engage in systems, and recognizing actually there's two different ways that systems can change. Systems change happens actually when we see regulatory change, such as passing some of the laws that you've talked about, Wojtek, but also it happens with culture change. And so again, in some of the things that we're seeing in our businesses, the Body Shop, for example, has their Be Seen, Be Heard campaign, which is all about amplifying the voice of young people in public life. So really trying to encourage, again, how do we lower the voting ages? How do we get young people to run for office? That is part of like a regulatory and a systems kind of change that we want to be supporting and driving. And from a culture change perspective, we know that sometimes we really need to break down sort of the walls of silence that exist around cultural things and really encourage people to have conversations about things that aren't working and that aren't right. And so Avon's done some really important work in particular around gender-based violence and helping provide links to resources that can support people that are experiencing that. So again, Sarah, it's a great question. Hopefully these sort of 5 ways that we've seen in the B Corp movement and bridging that to sort of some of the things we're doing at Natura & Co is helpful for people to think about, again, how they can engage in sort of this frontier of business leadership, which involves engaging in some of these activities that are aligned with what activists and activism is about. So yeah, engaging your people, taking a stand, using what you have access to, joining force with others, and really, really pushing and driving for the systems change that is about both regulatory change and culture change.
Thank you so much, Shar. Gabby, you've served on the boards of many companies, MasterCard, Eli Lilly, Warby Parker. Tell us about some of your experiences that have informed your thinking on how companies can engage stakeholders.
Well, thank you for the question, and I'm really excited to be part of this conversation. As Teneo's head of global ESG, I have the opportunity to work with a lot of different companies, and particularly do so through the lens of a board member. And we think that's valuable to our clients, particularly because this whole topic of ESG has become of increasing importance to boards, and that's really for a number of reasons, but particularly because as we talk about activism, in the past we primarily talked about external activists, in particular investor activists. But what we're seeing now over these last several years is that activists influences and concerns both externally as well as internally in the form of employees. And it is that constellation and really elevation of how important these issues are that has really kind of riveted the attention and priority of boardrooms, which, I do think is really a positive. So in any event, as board members, yes, we do think about kind of as my panelists have talked about, some of the really kind of strategic opportunities that ESG presents to companies. And so we think about that. And I always think about kind of offense and defense. So, so that's kind of an offense move. But as board members, we also have to think about risk a lot and how we manage risk. And so I do want to say a little bit about kind of defense and how boards work with leadership teams, I think some of the best boards, in order to be prepared, because it's inevitable that these issues will be raised either externally or internally or both. And again, it's partly because it's just kind of this heightened awareness. Obviously, the best defense is having a clear and coherent ESG strategy that you can talk about and share, and that makes sense and is grounded in that. That's a really important way to kind of address and mitigate these concerns. But one of the things we are also seeing over this last, year is a heightened expectation that boards and leadership teams will respond to and in some way affect areas that used to be considered kind of out of the purview, like political issues, gun control. We saw it very pointedly in the United States around Roe v. Wade earlier this year. Those topics used to be kind of, not part of this conversation. But increasingly there is an expectation, again, internally and externally, that boards and companies will weigh in some kind of way. And so being prepared for that is one of the, I think, new and very important set of conversations that boards and leadership leadership teams are having. And it's very important to do so. And it's not like you can anticipate what all the issues are, but what you can put in place is a framework for how you're going to address that. And I find the companies that are doing that are actually very well served by what we expect is going to be, a trend that's going to very much continue. But, within that framework of how do we address and how do we respond, boards and management team are talking through questions like, do we have relevant expertise in this area to comment? Do we need to make a statement to address our key stakeholders, and how do we balance those various interests? Does the issue at hand call into question a core value of MasterCard? We're talking a lot about gun control, and it really ties in very quickly to issues around data privacy. So it's complicated, but very important. And finally, if we have decided we're going to respond, how do we do so? It's not just through written and public statements, and sometimes that's internal messaging, and sometimes there are other ways that we can be supportive. So having that framework, though, that's really clear, I find is one of the most important ways a board and a leadership team can be prepared for activism. From a defensive point of view. From an offensive point of view, there's all the strategic stuff that we've, just talked about. And I think one of the things that I see that really differentiates companies is when they see whatever is their ESG values as core to their strategy. And I had the benefit, I've worked with a lot of great companies, like you mentioned MasterCard and Lilly and Warby Parker, which is actually a B Corp. But the best ones are ones for whom ESG and its values are really core to the company's strategy. And so then other stuff that comes out of it, MasterCard, for example, financial inclusion, is a core value of the company and is part of how we think about strategy. So then that drives all of our ESG initiatives in a way that's really logical and compelling and part of our kind of core business proposition. In the case of Whole Foods, we had a founder CEO who really believed, kind of early on, that conscious capitalism, how we think about the needs of different stakeholders, have to be addressed in order for us to do what is ultimately our job, which is to create value. And so we had as kind of a core vision health outcomes, but because we were thinking about all of these different stakeholders, it was then embedded in what our employee strategy was, how we worked in different communities in which we operated. Just really just an integral part, not just kind of something that's kind of off to the side. So when I think strategically, it is really that kind of core kind of set of values that drives ESG that I think is one of the most important success factors. So thank you.
Thanks, Gabby, for tying us back to the ways to manage risk as well, in addition to being proactive. So Mona, as an elected official, tell us how you think that government can be a partner in these efforts. What are some of the positive examples that you've seen?
Thank you so much. Again, like everyone, I'm honored to be here, and it's great to be on a panel of like-minded folks, and really excited to be part of this conversation. So government is a partner. We can't legislate, we have to be a partner. And I'll give you some great examples from my last year in the Senate. Earlier this year, I had two bills. One, and someone mentioned the beauty industry. So I had a Clean Beauty Act bill that was based on work that's been done by Beauty Counter, which is makeup that I actually wear. I think they're a B Corp, and I know that they have agreed to remove something like 1,800 chemicals from their products, which makes one then wonder 1,800 products or 1,800 chemicals are in other products. And so that makes you kind of think about that. And that bill was very successful. We got it all the way through the Senate, mostly through the House. It will definitely come back next year and should be able to pass. All of the women in my caucus signed on to that bill, and in the House as well. And it's because there is, we put makeup on to look younger and to look more, attractive, I guess. And then here is the same chemicals that are making us look old and then require us to wear more products. And so I think once you start to sort of spell that out for folks, that it's the same, things that you put on your face to make you look better actually end up making you look worse. And I got excited about this bill because my dad, when I was in high school, had told me he was in the aluminum industry, well, still is, and had told me that their biggest client was L'Oreal. And I was very confused by that. And he said, well, how do you think the makeup gets shiny, right? Because that's like aluminum bits in the makeup. And I don't know that many companies do that still, but there are definitely still aluminum products in makeup. So I did partner with the health and beauty industry. I partnered with the environmental industry and the toxic industry. And, that bill was very successful. I'll tell you another story about another bill where government partnership is key. I'm working on a bill called EPR, Extended Producer Responsibility. And it's about cradle to grave for packaging, right? So why are consumers responsible for the end of life for packaging when we did not make those decisions on what packaging is, right? If it's not, and my firm belief is if it's not recyclable, reusable, or compostable, it's 2022. These manufacturers should absolutely no longer be making it. And then yet consumers feel guilty because it's not recyclable. And now we wish recycled and put it in a bin that's not ever going to get recycled. So this bill was in deep partnership with the American Beverage Association, which is companies like Coca-Cola and Pepsi and Keurig and, all of the beverage manufacturers. And I was so surprised that ABA, American Beverage Association, was not only supporting the bill, but pushing the bill forward because, and this is interesting, I thought, they wanted a level playing field. They wanted to do the right thing, absolutely. Like, let's say Coca-Cola wanted to do the right thing, but they wanted all the other companies to have to do it as well. So it would be a level playing field. Now, I will say, companies like, and someone's already mentioned Patagonia. I mean, what they're doing is, they are really taking the lead. And I encourage companies to actually take the lead and stand up. I passed a styrofoam ban last year, and one of the companies I was surprised that signed in pro on my bill was McDonald's. And so I called my assistant. I said, "Hey, get the McDonald's lobbyist in here. I want to talk about this." And to my, I don't eat a McDonald's, but they don't use styrofoam in their packaging anymore, right? They realized it was harmful and they stopped doing it. And they didn't really make a lot of noise about it. They just did it. And that to me is being a leader and showing other organizations and companies that they too care and they can lead and they don't have to do it for PR. And all of these organizations have kids and grandkids, and this future that we are leaving behind for the next generation is on us, right? Our kids and grandkids. And for me, I don't have kids. So my nephews are going to look at me and say, "Auntie Mona, what did you do? What did you do to make sure I'm not living in a world full of uncompostable, unreusable, unrecyclable trash?" And so I think we need to have an answer for those kids, and they are our future stakeholders. And stakeholders include everybody, including people who can't speak, which includes or don't have voices at the table, which include kids and which include sentient beings. And we have to take responsibility. So I want to applaud companies that take the extra step to become B Corps. I want to applaud the companies that are leading in the supply chain. When Walmart decided to carry organic lettuce, that changed an entire industry. Okay, when they started carrying earthbound food lettuce, or whatever the company is called, they had to literally change the entire supply chain to make that happen. And that is true leadership. And I want to applaud companies that are stepping out. And Shar, you mentioned oh gosh, I forgot what it was now. The beauty company, the Bed Bath and Beyond. I forgot what it's called. I don't shop there, but you mentioned the sustainability stuff that they're doing, and that to me is true leadership. And it's doing it because your activists are also your consumers. Your activists are probably your kids, and B, your activists then become not only consumers but potentially shareholders with their 401ks and whatnot, or outright stock buying. And so we do have to, we have to remember that we're all in this together, and the race to the bottom is no longer acceptable. That is the status quo. And I love that you talked about, Sarah, or maybe it was Gabby, talked about Roe v. Wade. That's an issue most companies did not weigh in on before. And if you are not on the right side of this issue, I am not going to support you, period. I very much am a buy with my fork, buy with my feet, buy with my dollars, to make sure that I am supporting companies that have my shared values. And I think more and more consumers are getting that way, especially with social media.
Thank you, Mona. We have a little bit of time left, and I'm interested. Wojtek, do you want to build on that?
Yeah, I have a few thoughts based on what everybody said. Basically, I'm thinking that, like, in today's interdependent world, is it possible not to take a stance, actually? Even if you're not communicating or acting as an activist, you are making decisions. And the decisions you are, through these decisions, you're engaging in social and political issues. So, for example, let's take the war in Ukraine and the decision by many companies whether to stay or to cease doing business in Russia. So, many quit, many got it wrong and stayed. And that led to huge consumer boycotts in Poland, in France, in Germany. So maybe, if you're honest, maybe, like what Gabby said, maybe you should think about your purpose. Maybe you should align your company in a way that is, well, aligned with your purpose. and what you stand for. Tell the consumers what you stand for, what you want to achieve, what you want to fight for. And if you do this, basically, as Mona said, consumers will be voting with their feet, with their wallets, right? Either they will purchase with you because they agree with you, or they won't. So if you're not honest, it's not worthwhile. I just wanted to throw this out because this one quote from a famous Polish professor who actually survived Auschwitz and the Holocaust. He said this very famous sentence. He said, "It's worth to be honest, but it doesn't always pay off. It pays to be dishonest, but it's just not worth it." So I just want to throw this out.
Thank you. Mona, go ahead.
I'll just add very briefly. I think you're absolutely right. If companies don't vocalize what they stand for, as far as some of these issues like gun control and Roe v. Wade, they're making a choice. So by not saying anything, their silence is noted and their silence is deafening. And I noticed the companies that are standing up for my rights specifically, and I reward them by using my dollars to support them, even if it costs me more. Because for me, it's worth knowing that they are employing people, they're paying a living wage, they are standing up for their principles, and they aren't taking the easy way out. And therefore I do search those companies out and give money to them by buying their goods.
I just want to, I want to just acknowledge also, in addition to consumers, employees deeply care. And we're seeing millennials and Gen Zers, they deeply care. They want to understand that, their employer has values, how they live their values, as it relates to them. And so all of that's really important. And it is also complicated because there are very different stakeholders. And as a company and a board, you do have to weigh the needs and interests of different stakeholders. And we're accustomed to doing that. We're just not so accustomed to doing it on these issues that, are so fraught and complicated. If it's Roe v. Wade, if it's gun control, if it's privacy. And so, that's part of the reason I think it's especially important that we're transparent about how we approach these topics when we weigh in, when we take a stand, so that employees and others really understand, oh, okay, now this is why it makes sense that on Roe v. Wade, my employers offered this set of health benefits programs, this they took this position, they just need to understand that there is a way that we approach these things. We consider them. We may not always land exactly. You may not agree with where we landed and, on something ultimately, but you do want to understand we thought deeply about it. We balanced your interest. We can't, so that transparency around our process is particularly important because these issues are complicated.
Great. So we just have a short bit of time left. So I'm going to give you each a chance to weigh in one last time and say one practical piece of advice or one next step or one key takeaway that you have that you want everybody to be left with at the end of the discussion. And I will start with Mona.
Again, thanks for this great conversation. One thing I will say, in my work as a legislator, getting buy-in from the other side is actually on environmental issues has been easier than I thought, because they have kids, they have grandkids, and they have constituents. Eastern Washington is where we grow all the wheat. The wheat is literally burning in the ground. And so the farmers don't call it climate change. They call it the change in climate. Potato, potato, it's the same thing. But they started to realize that our crops are dying, right? They're growing blueberries. They've never grown blueberries in Washington, Eastern Washington before. And the only reason is because of the change in climate. So I started using the words change in climate. And it got me really far. And I can get Republicans to vote yes on my bills because their farmers are losing crops due to the change in climate. So don't discount somebody that doesn't have your perspective yet, because they will get there at some point. Something will change in their life, either a young person in their life, their economics of their business, or just seeing these, in the West, we're having extreme wildfire events all the time. We now have a season called smoke season, which we never had before. So don't discount those folks. They'll get there. You might just be first, but they'll soon to follow if you lead with love.
Well said. Wojtek, your brief final thoughts.
So my final thought will be, think about your purpose. If you're running a company, gather all the stakeholders in your company, talk about it, try to figure out what you stand for. And if you do this, then the next step would be account for these stakeholders. Think about them, consider them. And when you do this, you become honest, and then you can easily operate, easily do your business. Consumer will vote, they will choose, of course. Some will leave you, some will go with you. But again, I think it's worth to be honest, and it's not worth it to be dishonest. And that would be my main takeaway. And the other one would be also, please join the Interdependence Coalition and help us include all stakeholders in the decision-making processes of managers in Europe. Thank you.
Gabby, what would you like to communicate?
Yeah. Well, this has been a great discussion, and I think one of the things we see is that companies are in various stages on this whole ESG journey. ESG is broad; it covers a lot: environmental, societal, governance. It's very broad, and so it makes for a rich set of conversations. And so I think the piece about it that I just wanted to echo what others have said that can be so valuable of itself is the listening and engagement that you can have along the way with your very different stakeholders. The listening and engagement with investors, employees. Shar made a good point about younger employees, but there's so much that beyond just, kind of a more robust ESG strategy, that listening and engagement is inherently valuable. And so that is what I would encourage, that even if you have a sound ESG strategy, it can be deeper, it can be reviewed, it's an active process. And what makes it especially valuable is the listening and the engagement that, is embodied in doing it well.
And Shar, final word.
Wow, I'm taking down all these notes of these closing comments. So again, I've just loved this conversation. Quite helpful, but I'm also quite aware of the urgency and the significance of the challenges that we are facing with a range of totally interconnected emergencies. And so I would say I think we all just need to really recognize the moment that we're in, recognize the power and the privilege that we have, and find ways to aim higher, dig deeper, move faster, and work much more effectively together. And I think we need to be up for using different tools to engage in systems, knowing that that's both about that regulatory change and the culture change. So I personally am keen to find ways to, again, anchor what we're doing. This is telling us the physical science and the social science, as well as be inspired by the poetry and the creativity that's out there. So I think that's my sort of parting word. Again, how do we make sure we stay hopeful while being rooted in the urgency, and we really find ways to, look for higher ways of raising and acting much more collectively together. And as you said, Mona, being able to recognize that this is a moment that matters, and we have the moment, right, what side of history we're really going to be on. So to take that moment and to lead in the way that we know what's needed.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for a really, truly fascinating discussion. I know that I got a lot out of it. I learned a lot. I hope that you all did too. And I know that so many of us are struggling with these issues, and it's always helpful to hear such practical advice and experiences. Thank you as well to everyone who has tuned in today. Please stay on for our next session, which will begin in a moment. Thank you.